The mountain wind howled through the pines as Barbara Miller pressed herself against the rocky outcropping, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage around her left arm, where the bear's claws had found their mark. Below her, she could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, its massive form moving with terrifying purpose. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized the awful truth. She was trapped on this narrow ledge with nowhere to run. At 65, she had thought herself capable of this solo hiking trip, a final adventure to prove she wasn't ready to surrender to old age. Now, as darkness crept across the Montana wilderness, she wondered if her stubborn pride would be the death of her. The bear's heavy breathing echoed off the stone walls below. A sound from above made her freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and careful, moving along the ridge. Her mind raced with possibilities. Another hiker, perhaps someone who could help, or worse, another victim walking unknowingly into danger. The footsteps grew closer, and she could make out the silhouette of a man moving through the fading light. Kenneth Nguyen had been tracking the injured grizzly for 3 hours. At 70 years old, he moved through the wilderness with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades learning its rhythms and dangers. His weathered hands gripped his rifle with steady assurance, and his pale blue eyes scanned the terrain below with practiced efficiency. When he spotted her huddled on the ledge, blood staining her torn jacket, he felt a familiar surge of protective instinct. The bear was circling below, its massive head swaying as it searched for a route to its trapped prey. Kenneth had seen this behavior before, and he knew the animal would not give up easily. Moving with deliberate silence, he positioned himself on a higher outcropping that would give him a clear shot. The woman below had not yet noticed his presence, and he preferred it that way. The bear was a large male, probably weighing close to 800 pounds, and wounded animals were always the most dangerous. He settled into position, his breathing slow and controlled. Below, the bear had found a potential climbing route, a series of rocky shelves that would bring it within reach of the woman's hiding place. Kenneth could see her pressing herself further back against the stone, her face pale with terror. The first shot rang out across the canyon like thunder. The bear reared up on its hind legs, a roar of pain and rage tearing from its throat as Kenneth's bullet found its mark in the animal's shoulder. But the wound was not immediately fatal, and the grizzly's attention turned from the woman to this new threat. Barbara's head snapped up at the gunshot, her eyes searching the rocky slopes until she spotted the lone figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by fear for her unknown rescuer. Kenneth worked the bolt of his rifle with practiced efficiency. The bear was moving now, seeking cover behind the larger boulders. He had hoped for a clean kill with the first shot, but the animal's movement had spoiled his aim. "Ma'am, I need you to stay exactly where you are," his voice carried clearly through the thin air. "Don't move. Don't make any noise. I'm going to end this, but I need a clean shot." His words carried an authority born of experience, and Barbara found herself nodding. There was something about his voice, steady and unshakable, that made her believe he could do exactly what he promised. A second shot cracked through the night air, and this time Kenneth's aim was true. The heavy bullet struck the bear's center mass, penetrating deep into its vital organs. The animal staggered, took several uncertain steps, and then collapsed among the scattered boulders. Kenneth remained in position for several long minutes, watching for any sign of movement from the fallen grizzly. Only when he was completely satisfied that the threat had been eliminated did he begin his careful descent toward the woman's position. Barbara watched his approach with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Her rescuer was clearly older, his hair silver white beneath a worn baseball cap, his face deeply lined by years of exposure to sun and wind. But there was nothing frail about his movements or the confident way he handled his rifle. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked, his voice carrying the same calm authority she had heard during the confrontation. "I think I'll live," she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die up here." Kenneth nodded, already examining her injuries with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to wilderness medicine. The wounds were painful but not life-threatening, though they would need proper cleaning to prevent infection. "We need to get you down from here and find shelter for the night," he said, shouldering his rifle. "There's a cabin about 2 miles from here where we can tend to those wounds properly. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments." Barbara hesitated, studying his face in the fading light. She had lived long enough to be cautious about trusting strangers, especially in such isolated circumstances. But this man had just saved her life. "I'm 65 years old, sir," she said, testing her ability to stand on the narrow ledge. "Far too old to be keeping up with someone like you in these mountains." Kenneth's weathered face creased into what might have been a smile. "I'm 70, he replied simply. "We'll be slow together then." Something in his matter-of-fact acceptance of their shared limitations made Barbara feel less foolish about her predicament. She had spent recent years fighting against the increasing restrictions that age seemed to impose, raging against suggestions that she should slow down, be more careful, act her age. This stranger's acknowledgement that they were both operating under similar constraints somehow made her feel less alone. Kenneth helped her navigate the treacherous descent, his strong hands steady as he guided her down the steep slope. Despite his age, he moved with fluid confidence. Barbara found herself studying his profile, noting the deep lines around his eyes and the silver stubble that covered his lean cheeks. The dead grizzly lay motionless among the boulders. Kenneth paused beside the fallen animal, his expression unreadable as he looked down at the creature he had been forced to kill. "He was a magnificent animal," Kenneth said quietly, his voice carrying genuine regret. "Probably just protecting territory he's held for years. I'm sorry it had to end this way." His words surprised Barbara. She had expected relief, perhaps pride at having made such a difficult shot. Instead, she heard something approaching mourning in his voice. It made her look at her rescuer with new eyes. "You saved my life," she said simply. "I'm grateful, regardless of the cost." Kenneth nodded but didn't reply immediately. He knelt beside the bear and placed one weathered hand on the animal's massive shoulder, a gesture that seemed both respectful and final. The cabin proved to be a substantial log structure nestled in a small clearing about an hour's walk away. Solar panels gleamed dully on the roof, and she could see the faint glow of electric lights through the windows. Kenneth unlocked the heavy wooden door, gesturing for her to enter. The interior was spartanly furnished but scrupulously clean, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Medical supplies were neatly organized on a shelf near the kitchen area. "Sit down and let me look at that arm properly," Kenneth said, gathering supplies from the medical kit. "The wounds need to be cleaned before infection sets in." Barbara settled into a wooden chair near the fireplace, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. She watched Kenneth work, noting the gentle efficiency of his movements as he prepared to tend her injuries. His hands were steady as he cleaned the claw marks, his touch surprisingly gentle. The antiseptic stung sharply. But Barbara found herself more interested in studying her rescuer's face than focusing on the pain. "You've done this before," she observed, watching him apply fresh bandages with practiced skill. "Living out here, you learn to handle medical emergencies," Kenneth replied without looking up. "Oh, the nearest hospital is over 100 miles away. So you either learn to take care of yourself and others, or you don't survive very long." "How long have you lived out here?" she asked, genuinely curious. Kenneth finished securing the bandage before answering. "Going on 15 years now," he said finally. "Came up here after my wife passed, thought I needed some time to think. Never quite got around to leaving." There was a weight of unspoken history in those simple words, a suggestion of grief and loss that Barbara recognized from her own experience. She had lost her husband 8 years ago, and the loneliness that followed had been one of the driving forces behind her increasingly adventurous solo travels. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly, meaning it. Kenneth nodded acknowledgement but didn't elaborate. The fire he built soon had the cabin warm and comfortable. He prepared a simple meal from canned goods, moving around the small kitchen with easy familiarity. They ate in companionable silence, the events of the day creating an odd sense of intimacy between two strangers who had shared a life-threatening experience. "What brought you up here alone?" Kenneth asked eventually, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight. "These mountains aren't exactly friendly to solo hikers, especially this time of year." Barbara considered how to answer. "I suppose I was trying to prove something to myself," she admitted, "that I wasn't ready to be put out to pasture just yet. My children think I should move into one of those senior communities, spend my days playing bridge and complaining about my arthritis." Kenneth's expression remained neutral, but she thought she detected a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "And what did you hope to prove by hiking alone in grizzly country?" he asked. That I could still take care of myself, Barbara replied, then laughed ruefully. Obviously, that didn't work out quite as planned. You're alive, Kenneth pointed out. So that counts for something. Thanks to you, she said. If you hadn't been tracking that bear, I'd be dead right now. Kenneth shrugged as if saving lives was simply part of his daily routine. The bear was wounded and dangerous. Someone needed to deal with it before it hurt someone else. You just happened to be the someone else in question. The conversation continued as the fire burned down to glowing embers, ranging from practical matters of mountain survival to more philosophical questions about the choices that had brought them both to this remote cabin. Barbara learned that Kenneth had been an engineer before retirement, a man accustomed to solving problems through careful analysis and methodical action. Kenneth discovered that Barbara had been a teacher for 43 years, someone who had spent her career nurturing young minds. Her recent restlessness stemmed partly from the loss of that sense of purpose, the feeling that retirement had left her without a meaningful role. As the evening wore on, Barbara found herself increasingly comfortable in Kenneth's presence. There was something deeply reassuring about his calm competence, his apparent immunity to the small dramas that seemed to consume so many people their age. You should get some sleep, Kenneth said eventually, banking the fire for the night. That arm is going to be sore tomorrow, and you'll need your strength for the hike back to civilization. The small bedroom he showed her was simply furnished but comfortable, with a handmade quilt covering the narrow bed and a window that looked out over the moonlit forest. Sleep came surprisingly easily despite the day's traumatic events. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, pale morning light filtering through the window. Kenneth was already dressed and moving around the kitchen, his movements as quietly efficient as they had been the night before. How's the arm feeling? He asked, pouring coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. Sore, but not too bad, Barbara replied. You're up early. Old habits, Kenneth said with what might have been a smile. The mountains don't sleep late, and neither do the people who live in them. Eventually, the conversation turned to the logistics of getting her back to civilization in her abandoned car. The trail back to the main hiking path is about 5 miles, he explained, spreading a topographical map on the kitchen table. It's rough going in places, but manageable if we take our time. Barbara studied the map, noting the steep terrain and numerous creek crossings. Under normal circumstances, she would have been confident in her ability to handle such a hike. But her injured arm and the previous day's ordeal had left her feeling less certain. That's a lot of ground to cover, she said, trying to keep any note of apprehension out of her voice. We'll take it slow, Kenneth said simply. No point in rushing and risking another accident. I don't want to be more of a burden than I already have been, she said. You've done more than enough already. Kenneth's response was immediate and firm. You're not a burden, and I'm not about to let you try that hike alone with a wounded arm and no backup plan. They spent the morning preparing for the journey, Kenneth checking their supplies while Barbara tried to make herself useful despite her injured arm. His backpack was a marvel of organization, every item carefully chosen and precisely placed for maximum utility. The hike began under clear skies with morning sunlight filtering through the pine canopy. Kenneth set a steady but unhurried pace, frequently checking on Barbara's condition and adjusting their route to avoid the most challenging terrain. His knowledge of the local geography was encyclopedic. They paused frequently for rest breaks, Kenneth using these opportunities to check Barbara's bandages. During one of these stops, they encountered another hiker, a young man in expensive gear, who looked somewhat out of place in the rugged environment. Morning, Kenneth said with a nod, his voice carrying none of the warmth Barbara had grown accustomed to hearing. The young hiker, who introduced himself as Douglas Ortiz, seemed eager to engage in conversation, asking questions about trail conditions and wildlife sightings. But Kenneth's responses were brief and evasive. You folks see any sign of that problem bear they've been tracking? Douglas asked. Problem's been taken care of, Kenneth replied flatly, offering no details. Douglas seemed disappointed by the response, but after a few more minutes of increasingly one-sided conversation, he continued up the trail. You don't like talking to other hikers, Barbara observed once Douglas was out of earshot. Kenneth shrugged. Most of them are just passing through, looking for stories to tell back home. They don't really understand what they're seeing out here. As they continued down the trail, Barbara found herself thinking about the difference between her own motivations for being in the mountains and those of the young hiker they had just encountered. She had come seeking something personal and meaningful, a test of her own capabilities. Douglas seemed to view the wilderness as entertainment. Kenneth's perspective was different from both of theirs. For him, these mountains weren't a proving ground or playground, but simply home. He moved through the landscape with unconscious familiarity. They encountered several more hikers as they approached the more popular trails, and Barbara began to understand Kenneth's earlier reticence. Most visitors seemed to view the wilderness as a temporary escape, a brief adventure to be checked off before returning to civilization. One group of college-age hikers was particularly jarring in their casual disregard for basic wilderness etiquette. They played loud music from a portable speaker, left trash scattered around their rest area, and seemed oblivious to their impact on the environment. Kenneth's jaw tightened as they passed the group. "It bothers you seeing people treat the mountains like that," Barbara said once they were out of earshot. Kenneth was quiet for several minutes before responding. "These mountains have been here for millions of years," he said finally. "They'll be here long after we're gone. But that doesn't mean they can't be damaged by carelessness and disrespect." As they reached the main hiking trail, the contrast became stark. Where Kenneth's mountain home had offered solitude and pristine beauty, the popular trails showed clear signs of heavy human traffic. Worn paths, damaged vegetation, and scattered litter told the story of thousands of visitors who had passed through without considering their impact. Kenneth's discomfort with the crowds became more apparent as they joined the stream of hikers heading toward the parking area. He moved with the same quiet efficiency as before, but Barbara could see the tension in his shoulders. The parking area was a jarring return to civilization. Cars filled every available space, families unloaded elaborate camping gear, and the sound of car radios replaced the peaceful quiet of the deep forest. Barbara felt her own sense of displacement as she looked around for her vehicle. Her car sat exactly where she had left it, covered with dust and pine needles, but otherwise unchanged. Kenneth helped her load her gear, his movements efficient, but somehow reluctant. "I don't know how to properly thank you," she said finally, standing beside her car. "You saved my life, and then you went far beyond what anyone could have expected." Kenneth shrugged, the same gesture of casual dismissal he had used before. "You would have done the same for anyone in similar circumstances," he said simply. As she prepared to drive away, Barbara felt an unexpected reluctance to leave this enigmatic mountain man behind. Their brief time together had revealed depths of character and capability that she found deeply attractive. "Will I see you again?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. Kenneth's pale eyes studied her face for a long moment. "These mountains are my home," he said finally. "You know where to find me if you'd ever need anything." The drive back to town gave Barbara time to process everything that had happened. She had set out to prove her continued independence, only to find herself completely dependent on a stranger's kindness. Yet somehow the experience had left her feeling more confident rather than diminished. The medical attention she received at the small mountain town's clinic confirmed Kenneth's assessment of her injuries. The claw marks were healing cleanly, and the doctor praised the quality of the wilderness first aid she had received. "You're talking about Kenneth Nguyen," the doctor said with obvious respect. "That man has brought more injured hikers down from those mountains than anyone else in the county. You were lucky he was in the area." Over the following weeks, as Barbara returned to her normal life in the city, she found herself thinking frequently about her brief time in Kenneth's mountain cabin. The memory of his quiet competence provided a counterpoint to the small frustrations and anxieties of urban living. She began researching the area where Kenneth lived, learning about the history and ecology of the remote mountain region he called home. The more she learned, the more she understood why he had chosen such an isolated existence. As autumn progressed toward winter, Barbara found herself increasingly restless in her comfortable suburban home. The routines that had once provided structure now felt confining and artificial. She caught herself staring out the window at the distant mountains, remembering the clarity and purpose she had felt during those brief hours in Kenneth's world. The first significant snowfall triggered an unexpected wave of concern for Kenneth's welfare. Barbara found herself wondering how he managed the isolation of mountain winters, whether he had adequate supplies and backup plans for emergencies. When she called the local ranger station to inquire about winter conditions in Kenneth's area, the ranger she spoke with knew exactly who she was asking about. Kenneth Nguyen was well known to local authorities as both a valuable resource for search and rescue operations and someone who required no assistance in managing his own affairs. December brought an unexpected phone call from the Mountain Town Sheriff's Office. Kenneth had listed Barbara as an emergency contact, and they were calling to inform her that he had been injured in a skiing accident and was currently hospitalized with a broken leg and mild concussion. She made the drive to the mountain hospital without hesitation, covering the distance in record time despite treacherous winter road conditions. The sight of Kenneth lying in the sterile hospital bed, his weathered face pale against the white pillows, stirred emotions she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. "Ooh, didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said, his voice slightly hoarse but carrying the same calm authority she remembered. "When I heard you were hurt, I had to come," Barbara replied, settling into the chair beside his bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like an old fool who should have known better than to ski alone in backcountry," Kenneth admitted. "The leg will heal, but the concussion has the doctors worried about me going back to the cabin alone." Barbara felt a surge of protective concern. The thought of Kenneth being forced to give up his mountain home because of a temporary injury seemed fundamentally wrong. "What are your options?" she asked. Kenneth's expression grew grim as he outlined the limited choices available. The doctors wanted him in supervised care until his concussion symptoms completely resolved, which could take weeks or months. The alternative was finding someone willing to stay with him at the cabin during his recovery. As Kenneth spoke, Barbara felt a growing certainty about what she needed to do. The decision formed in her mind with surprising clarity, as if all the restlessness and dissatisfaction of the past months had been leading to this moment. "I could stay with you," she said quietly. Kenneth's pale eyes studied her face with careful attention. "That's generous of you, but you don't understand what you're offering. Winter in the mountains isn't like your hiking adventure. It's months of isolation, difficult conditions, and constant challenges." "I think I understand better than you might expect," Barbara replied. "And I think I need this as much as you do." The conversation that followed was unlike any Barbara had ever experienced. Kenneth questioned her motivations with methodical thoroughness, probing for weaknesses or unrealistic expectations. But as they talked, Barbara felt her initial certainty growing stronger rather than weaker. Kenneth's resistance was both practical and emotional. He clearly valued his independence and privacy, and the prospect of sharing his isolated home represented a significant compromise. But his injury had created circumstances that made such compromises necessary. When the final arrangements were made, Barbara felt a sense of anticipation and purpose that had been missing from her life for longer than she cared to admit. The drive to Kenneth's cabin took place in early January, with snow-covered peaks rising around them like ancient sentinels. Barbara had spent the intervening weeks preparing for extended wilderness living, purchasing appropriate clothing and equipment while researching the practical skills she would need. The cabin looked different under its blanket of snow, smaller somehow, but also more substantial. Smoke rising from the chimney indicated that Kenneth's neighbor, Jose Ali, had been maintaining the fire during Kenneth's hospitalization. Jose greeted their arrival with obvious relief, clearly glad to transfer responsibility for Kenneth's welfare to someone more qualified. Barbara could see the gratitude in both men's faces as she took charge of unloading supplies and settling Kenneth into his familiar surroundings. The next few weeks established a routine that surprised Barbara with its comfortable domesticity. Kenneth's injuries limited his mobility but not his mental acuity, and he proved to be an excellent teacher. Under his patient guidance, she learned to manage the solar power system, maintain the wood-burning stove, and handle the dozen small tasks that kept the cabin functioning efficiently. Kenneth's recovery progressed steadily but slowly. Barbara found herself settling into the rhythm of mountain life with surprising ease, her days structured around the practical necessities of survival in an isolated environment. The work was physically demanding, but deeply satisfying. The isolation that Kenneth had warned her about proved less challenging than either of them had expected. Barbara discovered that she genuinely enjoyed the quiet solitude of winter mountains, the sense of being disconnected from the constant noise and distraction of modern life. Kenneth proved to be a thoughtful and considerate housemate, despite his initial concerns about sharing his space. He was scrupulously careful about respecting Barbara's privacy and independence, while also being available when she needed guidance with unfamiliar tasks. As February arrived with severe storms that tested all of Barbara's newly acquired skills, she began to understand why Kenneth had been so concerned about her ability to handle mountain winter conditions. The work of keeping the cabin warm, the water lines unfrozen, and the access roads passable required constant attention and physical effort. But Barbara found herself rising to meet each challenge with growing confidence. Kenneth's patient teaching and her own determination proved adequate for handling everything the mountain winter could throw at them. More importantly, she discovered a sense of capability and self-reliance that had been dormant for years. The storms also provided opportunities for extended conversations that deepened their understanding of each other's backgrounds. Kenneth shared stories of his engineering career and the gradual disillusionment that had eventually led him to the mountains. Barbara talked about her teaching years and the sense of loss she had felt when retirement removed her from meaningful work. These conversations revealed the common ground that underlay their different life choices. Both had been shaped by careers focused on solving problems and helping others. Both had experienced the loss of spouses who had provided emotional anchoring, and both had struggled with finding purpose and meaning in their later years. As Kenneth's mobility improved and his need for daily assistance diminished, Barbara began to wonder about her own future plans. The original arrangement had been for her to stay until his recovery was complete, but the approaching end of that period filled her with unexpected reluctance to leave. Kenneth seemed to sense her internal conflict without her having to voice it directly. Their conversations began to include subtle explorations of possibilities that neither was quite ready to discuss openly. The subject finally came into the open during a March evening when they sat before the fire, watching snow fall steadily outside the windows. Kenneth had been moving around the cabin without assistance for several days, his recovery essentially complete. "You don't have to leave," Kenneth said quietly, his words carrying the weight of careful consideration. "This place is better with two people sharing the work and the isolation." Barbara felt her heart skip as she recognized the significance of his offer. Kenneth was not someone who made such gestures lightly, and his invitation represented a fundamental change in the solitary lifestyle he had maintained for 15 years. "Are you sure about that?" she asked, needing to understand the full implications. "Well, you've been alone here for a long time. Sharing this space permanently is different from a temporary arrangement." Kenneth's pale eyes met hers across the firelit room. "I've had 3 months to think about it," he replied. "This place has been my refuge, but it's also been my prison. Having you here has reminded me that isolation isn't the same thing as peace." The decision, when she finally made it, felt as natural and inevitable as the changing of seasons. Barbara's old life had been comfortable but empty, filled with activities that provided distraction rather than satisfaction. Kenneth's world offered challenges and rewards that engaged all her capabilities, plus the companionship of someone whose character she had come to deeply respect. The practical arrangements for Barbara's permanent relocation proved surprisingly straightforward. Her suburban house sold quickly to buyers who appreciated its condition and location. The proceeds provided more than enough to cover her share of cabin improvements and establish a financial cushion for their shared mountain life. Kenneth insisted on formal legal arrangements that protected both their interests while acknowledging their partnership. Barbara appreciated his careful attention to such details, recognizing them as evidence of the same methodical approach he brought to all aspects of wilderness living. The spring months brought new challenges as Barbara learned to handle the seasonal transitions that marked mountain life. Snowmelt created flooding risks that required constant monitoring, while the return of wildlife meant renewed vigilance about food storage and waste management. Their partnership evolved naturally as they discovered the most efficient ways to divide labor and responsibility. Kenneth's greater experience with mountain conditions made him the natural leader for weather-related decisions and wildlife management, while Barbara's organizational skills proved valuable for supply management and long-term planning. The arrival of summer brought an influx of hikers and campers to the surrounding area, reminding Barbara of the contrast between their chosen lifestyle and the temporary wilderness experiences most people sought. She found herself sharing Kenneth's protective attitude toward the mountains. When they encountered hikers in trouble, as happened several times during the busy summer season, Barbara was impressed by Kenneth's continued willingness to provide assistance despite his general preference for avoiding contact with outsiders. His reputation as a reliable source of help in emergencies was well-deserved. Her own role in these rescue situations evolved as her wilderness skills improved. Kenneth taught her basic emergency medical procedures and search techniques, recognizing that having a capable partner would make their assistance more effective. Barbara found deep satisfaction in being able to help others while supporting Kenneth's long-established role as an unofficial guardian of the mountain area. The first anniversary of Barbara's bear encounter passed quietly, marked only by a brief conversation about how much their lives had changed since that frightening day. Neither was given to excessive sentimentality, but both acknowledged that the random events that had brought them together had led to outcomes neither could have anticipated. Kenneth's health remained excellent despite his age, his daily routine of physical activity and outdoor work maintaining strength and stamina that impressed visitors half his age. Barbara found her own fitness improving dramatically as she adapted to the demands of mountain living. Their social interactions remained limited but meaningful, consisting mainly of occasional visits with neighbors like Jose Lee and professional contacts with local rangers and medical personnel. Both seem to have found the optimal balance between solitude and community. As autumn returned with its spectacular display of changing leaves and crisp mountain air, Barbara reflected on the transformation her life had undergone in less than 2 years. The restless dissatisfaction that had driven her to attempt solo hiking had been replaced by a deep sense of contentment and purpose. Kenneth's own transformation was more subtle but equally significant. The rigid solitude that had characterized his first 15 years in the mountains had given way to a more flexible approach that accommodated partnership without sacrificing independence. Their relationship had evolved into something unique and valuable, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared challenges, and complementary strengths. Neither romantic love nor simple friendship adequately described the bond that had developed between them, but both understood its importance to their individual well-being. The approaching winter held no terrors for Barbara now, only the anticipation of another season of shared challenges and quiet satisfactions. She had learned to read weather patterns and wildlife behavior, to manage complex systems and solve practical problems, to find peace in solitude and strength in cooperation. As they prepared the cabin for another winter season, working together with the easy efficiency born of experience and mutual understanding, Barbara marveled at the unexpected directions her life had taken. The bear attack that had seemed like such a disaster had actually been the catalyst for the most meaningful period of her adult life. Kenneth's comment about being slow together had proven prophetic in ways neither had anticipated. Their shared acknowledgement of aging had become the foundation for a lifestyle that honored their limitations while maximizing their remaining capabilities. They had found a way to grow old with dignity and purpose, supporting each other while maintaining individual autonomy and strength. The second winter brought new challenges that tested both their individual skills and their ability to work together under pressure. A series of unprecedented storms isolated them completely for nearly 3 weeks, cutting off all outside contact and forcing them to rely entirely on their own resources. Barbara found herself grateful for Kenneth's methodical approach to preparation and his calm leadership during crisis situations. When the storms finally broke, they discovered that several other mountain residents had not fared as well. Jose Lee had suffered a heart attack during the worst of the weather, and only prompt action by Barbara and Kenneth saved his life. Their coordinated response demonstrated how effectively they had learned to function as a team. Spring brought news that would test their relationship in a different way. Barbara's daughter, Jennifer, announced her engagement and her desire for her mother to return to the city for an extended period to help with wedding preparations. Kenneth's response revealed the depth of his understanding and respect for Barbara's family relationships. He encouraged her to spend whatever time was necessary with her daughter, assuring her that he could manage the cabin alone and that her mountain home would be waiting when she was ready to return. The months Barbara spent in the city helping with wedding preparations provided an interesting perspective on the life she had left behind. She found herself missing the mountains constantly, feeling confined and restless in the urban environment that had once been her natural habitat. When Barbara returned to the cabin in late summer, she felt like she was truly coming home. Kenneth's welcome was characteristically understated, but unmistakably warm, and they quickly fell back into their established routines as if she had never been away. The third year brought a new dimension to their relationship as they began to plan for the long-term future. Both were in their 70s now, And while their health remained good, they recognized the need to prepare for the challenges that advancing age would inevitably bring. Kenneth's practical nature led him to research options for aging in place, investigating medical alert systems and exploring arrangements with local healthcare providers. Barbara contributed her organizational skills to developing comprehensive emergency plans and establishing relationships with family members who could provide support if needed. The process of planning for their future also led to deeper discussions about their individual histories and the paths that had brought them together. Kenneth shared more details about his marriage and the grief that had driven him to seek mountain solitude. Barbara talked about her own struggles with loss and the search for meaning that had led to her fateful hiking trip. These conversations revealed the profound compatibility that underlay their successful partnership. Both had been shaped by experiences of love and loss. Both had spent careers focused on helping others, and both had reached a stage of life where authenticity and purpose mattered more than social conventions or material success. As autumn arrived once again, Barbara reflected on the remarkable journey that had transformed her from a lonely retiree into a confident mountain woman. The skills she had learned, the challenges she had overcome, and the partnership she had built with Kenneth had given her a sense of accomplishment that surpassed anything she had achieved in her previous life. Kenneth's own transformation was equally remarkable, though characteristically understated. The man who had once lived in complete isolation had learned to share his space and his life without losing the essential independence that made mountain living possible. The approaching winter held familiar challenges, but also the comfort of shared experience and proven competence. Barbara no longer worried about her ability to handle mountain conditions, and Kenneth no longer questioned the wisdom of their partnership. The fourth winter brought an unexpected visitor who would test both their hospitality and their judgment. Richard Stewart, a man in his early 60s, arrived during a blizzard, claiming to be a lost hiker in need of emergency shelter. Kenneth's instincts immediately warned him that something was not quite right about their unexpected guest. Richard's story had inconsistencies that became more apparent as the storm continued. He claimed to be an experienced hiker, but his gear was inadequate for winter conditions, and his knowledge of the local area was clearly limited. More troubling were the subtle signs of deception in his behavior. The truth about Richard emerged on the third day when Kenneth discovered him searching through Barbara's personal belongings. The confrontation that followed was brief but decisive, with Kenneth's quiet authority and obvious competence convincing Richard that attempting anything illegal would be both futile and dangerous. The incident prompted serious discussions about security measures and emergency procedures that they had not previously considered necessary. Their mountain refuge, while generally safe, was not immune to the dangers that plagued the wider world. The experience strengthened their partnership by demonstrating how effectively they could work together under pressure. Barbara's ability to remain calm and follow Kenneth's lead during the crisis, combined with his protective instincts and tactical thinking, had resolved a potentially dangerous situation without violence. Spring brought happier visitors in the form of Barbara's daughter, Jennifer, and her new husband, who came to see for themselves the mountain life their mother had chosen. Kenneth's initial nervousness about hosting city dwellers proved unfounded as the young couple showed genuine interest in learning about wilderness living. The visit provided an opportunity for Kenneth to see Barbara in her role as mother and family member, adding new dimensions to his understanding of her character. The successful visit strengthened family relationships while also validating Barbara's life choices. As summer progressed, Barbara and Kenneth found themselves increasingly involved in the informal network of mountain residents who looked out for each other's welfare. Their successful handling of various emergencies had earned them recognition as reliable sources of help. This expanded role brought new satisfactions along with additional responsibilities. Barbara discovered that her teaching background translated well to wilderness education, and she began working with Kenneth to develop safety programs for the increasing number of visitors to their area. The fifth year marked a significant milestone as both acknowledged that their mountain life had become their permanent identity rather than a temporary arrangement. The legal and financial structures they had established were formalized into a comprehensive partnership agreement that reflected their mutual commitment. Kenneth's health remained remarkably good for someone in his mid-70s, though he had begun to show some signs of natural slowing. Barbara, now 70, found that her own physical condition had stabilized at a level that allowed her to handle all the demands of mountain living. Their daily routines had evolved into a comfortable rhythm that maximized both efficiency and enjoyment. Morning tasks were divided according to individual preferences, with Barbara typically handling indoor work while Kenneth managed outdoor responsibilities. The arrival of autumn brought the usual preparations for winter, but this year also included planning for a significant celebration. Barbara and Kenneth had decided to mark the 5th anniversary of their partnership with a small gathering of the mountain neighbors and friends who had become their extended family. The anniversary celebration proved to be a memorable occasion that highlighted how much their lives had changed since that first frightening encounter with the bear. Jose Lee regaled the group with stories of Kenneth's legendary rescues over the years. Local rangers shared their appreciation for the couple's contributions to mountain safety and wilderness education. As Barbara looked around the room filled with friends and neighbors, she marveled at the community they had built in this remote location. The isolation she had initially feared had been replaced by a network of relationships based on mutual respect and shared challenges. The 6th winter brought a new challenge that tested their preparedness in unexpected ways. A massive ice storm knocked out power lines throughout the region and damaged their solar panel system, forcing them to rely entirely on backup generators and wood heat for several weeks. Barbara's organizational skills proved crucial during this extended emergency as she coordinated their limited fuel supplies and managed their food stores. Kenneth's technical knowledge allowed him to jury-rig temporary repairs while planning for more permanent solutions. When spring finally arrived and they could assess the full extent of the storm damage, Barbara and Kenneth found themselves facing significant repair costs and the need to upgrade several systems. The work required would be both physically demanding and financially substantial. Kenneth's response to these challenges reflected the same practical optimism he had shown throughout their partnership. Rather than viewing the necessary improvements as burdens, he saw them as opportunities to make their home more efficient and secure for their remaining years. The repair and upgrade work provided an excellent opportunity for Barbara to expand her technical skills under Kenneth's patient guidance. She learned to install solar components, repair plumbing systems, and handle basic electrical work. Each new capability increased her confidence and reduced their dependence on outside contractors. As they worked together on these projects, Barbara reflected on how much she had changed since her arrival at the mountain cabin. The frightened woman who had needed rescue from a bear attack had been replaced by someone capable of handling complex technical challenges in emergency situations. Kenneth's own evolution continued as well, though in more subtle ways. His willingness to accept help and share decision-making had grown steadily throughout their partnership, replacing the rigid self-reliance that had characterized his early years of mountain living. The summer months brought a steady stream of visitors seeking Kenneth's assistance with various wilderness emergencies, and Barbara found herself increasingly involved in these rescue operations. Her medical knowledge made her a valuable partner in providing emergency care to injured hikers and lost travelers. One particularly challenging rescue involved a family whose young son had fallen into a mountain stream and suffered hypothermia and possible internal injuries. Barbara's quick thinking and medical skills stabilized the child while Kenneth coordinated the evacuation effort. As autumn approached, Barbara and Kenneth began planning for what they hoped would be a quieter winter season. The previous year's challenges had been successfully overcome. Their systems were now more robust and reliable, and their own skills and confidence had reached new levels. The anniversary of Barbara's first bear encounter passed with little fanfare, though both acknowledged privately how much their lives had changed since that frightening day. What had begun as a chance meeting during an emergency had evolved into a partnership that enriched both their lives. Their relationship had found its natural equilibrium, a balance of individual autonomy and mutual support that allowed both of them to thrive in their chosen environment. They had learned to be slow together without being weak, to accept help without losing independence. As winter settled over their mountain home once again, Barbara felt a deep sense of satisfaction with the life she and Kenneth had built together. The challenges they had faced had only strengthened their partnership, while the successes they had achieved had validated their choice to commit to this unconventional lifestyle. Kenneth's quiet presence beside the evening fire provided a constant reminder of how much her life had been enriched by their unlikely partnership. The man who had saved her from the bear had continued to be her protector and guide, while she had become his companion and support in ways that neither had initially anticipated. The seventh year brought an unexpected opportunity that would test their commitment to their chosen lifestyle in a new way. Barbara's son-in-law received a job offer that would relocate Jennifer's family to a city only 50 miles from the mountain cabin, close enough for regular visits, but far enough to maintain independence. The prospect of having family nearby delighted Barbara, while also creating new considerations about their long-term plans. Kenneth encouraged her to explore the possibilities, understanding that family connections were important to her happiness. Jennifer's move to the area brought new dimensions to Barbara's mountain life as she became involved with her grandchildren's education about wilderness living and environmental conservation. Kenneth proved to be an excellent grandfather figure, teaching the children wilderness skills while instilling in them a deep respect for the natural world. The presence of family nearby also provided additional security for Barbara and Kenneth as they continued to age. Jennifer's family could serve as emergency contacts and support resources while respecting the independence that was so important to the mountain couple. As they entered their 8th year together, both Barbara and Kenneth had reached their mid-70s with health and vitality that impressed everyone who knew them. Their mountain lifestyle, with its emphasis on physical activity, clean living, and stress reduction, had clearly contributed to their successful aging. Their reputation in the mountain community had evolved to the point where they were considered elder statespeople, sources of wisdom and experience that younger residents sought out for guidance. Barbara and Kenneth accepted these roles with characteristic humility while recognizing the responsibility that came with being looked up to by others. The partnership they had built had become a model for other couples seeking to age successfully while maintaining independence and purpose. Their story had spread throughout the region, inspiring others to consider unconventional approaches to retirement in later life. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors once again, Barbara reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point in her life. The woman who had once felt useless and discarded by society had become a respected member of a mountain community, a skilled wilderness resident, and a valued partner to an extraordinary man. Kenneth's own transformation was equally remarkable, though characteristically understated. The isolated hermit had become a community leader, a patient teacher, and a loving partner while never losing the essential qualities that had drawn him to mountain living in the first place. Their relationship had weathered every challenge they had faced, from emergency situations to family obligations to health scares to financial pressures. Each test had only strengthened their bond while proving their ability to function as an effective team. The approaching winter held no fears for them now, only the comfortable anticipation of another season of shared challenges and quiet satisfactions. They had built something lasting and valuable, a partnership that honored both their individual needs and their mutual dependence. As they sat before their evening fire, watching snow begin to fall outside their windows, Barbara and Kenneth both understood that they had achieved something rare and precious. They had found a way to age with dignity and purpose, to remain useful and engaged while accepting the natural changes that time brought. The bear attack that had brought them together seemed like a lifetime ago, though its lessons about vulnerability and interdependence remained relevant to their daily lives. Kenneth's matter-of-fact observation that they would be slow together had proven to be not a limitation, but a foundation for building a life that neither could have imagined when they first met. Their story had become a testament to the possibility of finding love, purpose, and adventure at any age, proof that the best chapters of life might still be waiting to be written even when conventional wisdom suggested that all the important events had already occurred. The mountain winds that howled around their cabin carried no threat now, only the promise of another season of shared challenges and mutual support. Barbara Miller and Kenneth Nguyen had built something that would endure, a partnership that honored both their individual strengths and their shared commitment to living fully regardless of what the calendar might say about their age. They had learned to be slow together, and in that slowness, they had found a pace that allowed them to savor every moment of the remarkable life they had created in the mountains they both called home.